Hey, listeners, before we get into today's podcast, I just first of all want to say thank you. This has been 5 years of podcasting for us, and I want to say thank you to those who have been here 5 years listening to us and those who this is your first time listening. It's been a phenomenal journey and a lot of fun, and I can't think of how else I would like to spend the next 5 years other than continuing to podcast and hopefully bring you guys some great shows and great interviews. With that being said, I want to thank today's sponsors, first of which is Pretentious Pickles. Our good friends at Pretentious Pickles, located right here in Plymouth, Massachusetts on 190 Water Street, have a huge variety of pickled items for your consumption. There's pickled beets, Brussels sprouts, carrots, mushrooms, cucumbers, you name it, they've put it in a jar and pickled it. They make a phenomenal product, and for the second year in a row have been won Best Gourmet Shop in the South Shore, Massachusetts area. So congratulations to Lorraine and everyone at Pretentious Pickle Company. And if you can't make it to their store, you can stop by www.pretentiouspickle.com and you can place an order online. They'll ship it right to you. If you're into pickles, you should definitely check that out. And today's second sponsor is Omio. Omio is a travel booking platform that makes planning a journey in Europe and North America effortless. Just enter your travel details and Omio will magically give you all the train, bus, flight, and ferry options for your journey. It's never been simpler to book your first real vacation of 2021. Best of all, using Omio saves you time and money. That's a win-win in our books. Omio wants to help you leave your house this summer by offering 5% off your next booking. Just head to omio.com, that is omio.com, and use the code OMIO5 at checkout. Valid until July 31st for new users on all modes of transportation. It's just the pick-me-up 2021 needs. Omio, plan, book, and love the journey. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome back, Inebri-ites. This is Andy, the Inebri-art podcast. And today we are joined by an author, Katherine Dykstra, who is just recently put out a book called What Happened to Paula? Correct?
That's correct.
So if you know, my brief research is gonna make me not seem like an idiot, it is a true crime novel.
It is. It's definitely a true story. It's a nonfiction book. They've categorized it as true crime, but I don't think it's a traditional true crime in that you don't find out, who done it at the end. The book is more really about like why this crime happened and like all of the sort of systemic things in our society that lead to women getting killed often.
Oh, that's interesting. I feel like true crime is like such like the buzzword. It's the gluten-free in the entertainment world,
No, for sure. And it was, it's a hard book to categorize because it does 100% revolve around the death of a girl.
Mm-hmm.
But it also includes memoir. I talk a lot about the women in my own family. And it includes a lot of, sort of sociological studies from both the 1970s when this girl was, or the late 1960s when this girl was alive, as well as today, and like how those things sort of transcend time and, what has changed and what hasn't changed for women.
So why did you want to address this particular instance?
Well, it's funny. So when I met my husband, so his mother went to school with this girl, and they never overlapped, but they knew one, or my mother-in-law, Susan, knew who Paula was. And it was sort of something that had sat with her, this unsolved crime, for many, many years. And she was became kind of obsessed with the fact that there were a lot of failings in the case. The police failed her, the media failed her, and society failed her. And so she sort of became obsessed with this case. And when I met my husband, Susan, my mother-in-law, was working on a documentary film. She's a writer, but her husband's a filmmaker and TV person, and they were working on a film about this girl's death. They invited me. So I'm a journalist. And when my mother-in-law found that out, she said, well, maybe this is something that you'd be interested in. They were all taking this trip to Cedar Rapids in, I guess it was 2008. And I agreed to go on the trip, but I told her that I would not be participating in researching this girl's death because frankly, it scared me. It frightened me. At that time in my life, I was, single and living on my own in New York and, sort of trying to find my own way and to think about the ways that women are at risk in the world was something that I couldn't entertain, because to do that was to sort of question my own safety and my own security. So I told them, I was like, nope, this is not something I'm interested in. But I'll come with you, because I was trying to get to know the family. And, it was just, so we all went on this trip, and I didn't, they would go off in the day and do their interviews and all of that stuff. And I would kind of like stay at the house and hang out and cook dinner and stuff. And then like flash forward about 6 years in 2014. And by this time I'm now married and I've just had my first child, and Susan circles back to me again. And at this point, she's been unable to make the documentary that she wanted to. The big problem being that there is no ending. There is no, they weren't able to solve it, even though that was a goal. And she said, she couldn't let go of the story. And she said, I really think that this is something that you would be interested in. Will you look at it again? And at this point in my life, I was suddenly sort of, I had become very aware of my womanhood. I had spent my early career feeling like, I could do anything that a man could do, and feeling very, I don't know, I just didn't really question my gender. But then I had a child, and I saw how quickly my life and my husband's life, like my life changed in a way that was different from his.
Yeah.
He sort of like, his life was changed for sure, but I was just like, I was completely remade. Like I wasn't able to go back and work in the way that I thought I would be able to. And, I wasn't able to do any of the things I was doing before, basically. And that sort of brought up, and then sort of simultaneously, this was 2008. So in the air, like, women were coming out against Bill Cosby at that time. Yeah. And there was a whole bunch of, I'm sorry, I said 2008. This was 2014. This was after my son was born. And suddenly there was all this sort of like anger in the air. And when I started to think about it, and the two things that I knew about Paula's case were that she might have been pregnant when she disappeared, and she disappeared 3 years before Roe v. Wade. And and so those two things just seemed so relevant to the situation of women today. So at that point, I was angry and ready to sort of examine how this girl could be forgotten and sort of dismissed and failed. So it's a very long way of getting to how I came to the story.
Yeah. And it's interesting because we've actually had a author on one of our shows not too long ago, and she wrote a book about a fairly local serial killer that they never found, and targeted women who were prostitutes and drug addicts, and and it was one of those so long ago where now she theorized that if it happened today, they'd be able to be caught just by where was your cell phone pinged last, that kind of thing. Do you think that this is purely systematic, or do you think it has something to do with the day of when it occurred?
I think it's both for
Yeah.
sure. So, if you talk to many of the detectives are deceased at this point, but Susan was able to talk to some before I came on board and before they died. And I was able to talk to both one who was pretty crucial to the case or who did a lot of work on the case, as well as the current cold case team. And they all maintain that if we had all of the, technology and the DNA, today, then this crime would be solved. And there's veracity to that for sure. However, this is a little bit of a tangent, but the Cedar Rapids cold case team, so this is where this girl, Paula Oberbrockling, lived. The Cedar Rapids cold case team was able to just use DNA in order to solve the case of Michelle Martinko, which was another girl who had been killed in Cedar Rapids this was, I think, 7 years after Paula died. So it was like 1977 or 78 maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And her case also went unsolved for 45 years or however long. And the cold case team that's current was able to, obtain DNA off of a straw that they had, of a suspect. And it was like this real, this really gumshoeing type, event. And now this man has currently been convicted for this, the murder of Michelle Martinko. So it is true that those things happen. However, when Paula disappeared on, July 11th in 1970, she had borrowed her roommate's car overnight, like sort of in the middle of the night.
Mm-hmm.
She left wearing like sort of, like a very light dress and no shoes. And when the next morning she still hadn't returned with the roommate's car, of course, the roommate and Paula's mother and family and, she had two boyfriends, there were two men in her life, two guys. One of the guys, they all started searching for, the car, and they found the car, outside this sort of, quickie shop type place. And it was parked in a no parking zone. And, the back windows were down and, the car was unlocked and there was nothing inside. And Paula's mother immediately called the police and said, my daughter is missing and we found this car. And the police got to the scene and they didn't dust for fingerprints. They barely looked in the car, but they told Debbie Kellogg, Paula's roommate, that she needed to move it or else it would be towed. So this was the attitude toward the police. The attitude of the police toward this missing girl was just complete disinterest and nonchalance. They, in fact, I think it was 4 days passed before they conducted the first interview with Paula's mother. And, the first conversation that Paula had, Carol Oberbrockling, Paula's mother, had over the phone with police was, she was saying, my daughter is missing. And they said, oh, that's what girls do. She's probably at some concert like Woodstock. She's probably like, yeah, they were very dismissive of the idea that, Paula might be in trouble. And that sort of like ran its course throughout the whole case. Like the media, the Cedar Rapids Gazette, which did an excellent job covering other things. Like they had the journal, the chops. Like I saw evidence of other cases that were covered, from start to finish in excellent pieces of journalism. They only wrote 3 stories ever about Paula's death, one of which was her obituary, and then was the discovery of her body. So there was no one saying, why hasn't this crime been solved? There was no one advocating really for Paula.
Right. It's one of those, like, if you had put a story out earlier, it would draw more attention, and someone might be like, "Oh, I remember seeing someone pull in there or park there or whatever." And
Exactly.
yeah, that's so
It's
tragic.
interesting. So Susan, my mother-in-law, was able to obtain a copy of the police file. So that was something that I had, which is rare for, an open investigation because, it was never solved. But the whole time that I had the file, I thought it was so like, it's like, maybe, gosh, no, I'm not exactly sure, but like between 100 and 200, it's no more than 200 pages. But I thought that it was a lot. I was like, oh, 200 pages of, interviews and this and going back and forth or whatever. And it wasn't until, I don't know, maybe a couple years ago that I was listening to a podcast actually about another unsolved case that was equally long. And they were talking about having like 40 bankers boxes worth of, reams of paper and interviews. And then it was only then that I realized like, oh my God, they did nothing. Like this is this 200 pages is, over 50 years.
Right. That's like nothing when you figure out. I mean, what is that? Like 2 pages a year?
Yeah.
No, 4 pages a year.
Well, they did it. I mean, it was all like, it was all done within the first year. But yeah, they practically abandoned the case within, the first 2 years.
Were there ever primary suspects, or was it just a complete lack to look into? Like, I don't want to spoil too much of the book.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so if you look at the police file, they sort of rule people out for very, I would say, strange reasons. I mean, I'm not a detective, so I don't know, but like, for example, she had 2 boyfriends. One was white and one was black. And the white boyfriend, Lonnie Bell, was with her the night that she disappeared early on in the night. And, he was sort of a wild card type. And they interviewed him, I think twice, and they found a bunch of holes in his like discrepancies. And there were a lot of things that didn't really fit with what they knew, which was suspicious.
Yeah.
However, he drove a Porsche, and one of the detectives visited a Porsche dealership and measured the size of the trunk that Lonnie Bell had, and then said, "Oh well, Paula." So Paula was tall, and she wore like a size 9 shoe or size 11. She was tall. She was big, and they said, "Oh well, Paula could never have fit in his trunk," and that was the reason that
that seems really
right.
funky.
Like,
yeah,
I mean, it's not in those words. She couldn't fit in his trunk, and therefore we're not investigating further. It was just like this was sort of the last entry about Lonnie Bell, and my question is like, well, could she have fit in his passenger seat, or could she have fit in another car?
Another car, yeah,
exactly. So there were lots of things like that.
Yeah. And so you say it's systemic. So do you feel this is the kind of thing that happens across other cases as well, when it comes to women, that that it's just kind of put on the, like you said, well, that's what girls do. They kind of go off or whatever.
Yes, I do. So one of the interesting things is that there were girls turning up dead all over Cedar Rapids and all over that area, the Midwest, during the late 60s. And so as I was researching Paula's case, these other instances would crop up. Like I would be introduced to, so for example, there was another woman, Julie Benning, who was also, Paula was found just outside the mouth of a culvert, which is like a that diverts rainwater. And Julie Benning was found stuffed into a culvert in Waverly, Iowa, which is, I'm not sure exactly how far from Cedar Rapids, but within the vicinity. And I interviewed her sister, Carol Keene, and she talked about the police disinterest in Julie Benning. So Julie, she was a high school graduate. And when she got out of school, her father told her that she had to get a job, and she applied, and that they wouldn't pay for college. And she applied to jobs all over the area. And the only job she was able to get was at the Sir nightclub, which was like, a club where women danced.
Yeah.
And she wasn't a dancer. She was a waitress. So it wasn't even that she was taking her clothes off, which should also be, you shouldn't be killed for that either. But,
right.
So she wasn't even putting herself, in, I'm using air quotes here, like danger by dancing. All she did was work there, but sort of the general consensus was, oh, while she worked in this club, this was the thing that got her killed, or this was the thing that led to her. And, this idea being that it's a woman's choices, be them to work in a club, or like in Paula's case, to like have premarital sex, or to date a Black guy. Like, they really dismissed her because that was, seen as so awful at the time. They'll think about the late 60s in the Midwest. And so it's like these decisions that led to their deaths, and not the choice of whomever killed them to kill them.
Right. I never understood that. And I was referring to that other author we had on, and it was always that, like, oh, well, they were on drugs, or, well, they were a prostitute. And it's like, well, they still didn't deserve to die.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
there's still someone out there killing them. That's worse. Killing is worse than drugs,
Yeah.
It's
and
so
I feel
bizarre.
like that's like, my book sort of goes into that. It's like, it could be anything, they could be too dependent on drugs, or too pregnant, or too single, or too Black, or too immigrant, or to anything. Like there's the way that we look at, we're like, oh, well, they're this, so they put themselves at risk. But that's false. That's a false narrative.
I see that a lot. And then you kind of also see the people who, maybe have a drug addict in their life, but they'll be like, oh, well, that's different because, he got addicted to drugs because of, he was taking opioids for pain, and that's how he got. So that's different. And it's just like, it's not different. You just know the story.
Right. Exactly. And there's a story for everyone. And the thing is like, our emphasis on those types of stories just serves to excuse the fact that women are being killed, right? Like if we pay so much attention to like this other narrative, the idea that like, oh, well, she danced in a club, or, oh, she did this. What we're doing is we're giving a pass to whomever,
is doing it. Yeah. You have a murderer. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's bizarre. So you said you are a journalist. I shouldn't say started as a journalist, but so how was writing I always get these backwards. Non-fiction novel different than normal journalism?
I mean, so I had to, when I was first considering writing this book, or when I was first drawn to the case, I thought that it was going to be a magazine article. Like my idea was like sort of a long form journalism type piece, examining sort of the things that were working against Paula. And, but as I was working on that piece and sharing it with my trusted readers, so here, I'll back up one second. And that is to say that my mother-in-law, Susan, when she was, not only did she try to make a documentary, but she tried to sell a TV series. She tried to write a book. She tried to fictionalize this story. Like she tried to come at this story in 1,000 different ways. And the answer that she continually got over and over again was, who cares? Who cares about some girl who died? Like, it was just this like complete disinterest. So like the same idea that the cops gave, Paula's mother in 1970 was what Susan was getting in the 2000s, from agents and editors and all sorts of like people, gatekeepers or whatever, who cares? So when I took it on and I thought it was going to be this magazine article, and I shared it with my team, the people that I trust, I sort of got a level of the same disinterest. It was like, I don't understand why this is relevant. And for me, it was always so shocking because I was like, how is this not relevant? Like, how is it not like, I don't understand.
Like you said, especially since like the whole Weinstein, Cosby,
Yes.
like all that stuff going on. It's super relevant.
Exactly. Like, I just felt that it was so, like, yes, I did not understand how someone could read about Paula's case or hear about Paula's case and not be interested. So then I started thinking about, like, okay, well, if nobody else is interested, the question I would always get is, why are you interested? And that made me think that maybe I needed to approach this a little differently. So, I'm a journalist, but I also, like, I got my MFA in narrative nonfiction. And so and the thing that what I love to read are like essays and sort of, nonfiction with a very heavy eye, meaning like a very heavy, authorial perspective.
Yeah.
So I started to think, well, maybe if I start to frame this story from my own point of view, and I show the reader the reasons that I'm attracted to it or that why I think it's important, maybe they also will think it's important. And so that's how it sort of became this blend of three different things. So it became Paula's story, which is like, highly researched and journalistic. And then it's my, sort of my frame on top of that. So how I'm responding to the things I'm learning about Paula's story and the way that I view it or judge it or, understand it. And then this like third, like sort of sociological context of like, this is what it was like, for the races in 1970 in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And this is what it was like, if you were married, this was the way domestic violence was viewed in 1968. And so there's like these sort of three threads running through the whole book, or three perspectives, I guess.
And when you write something more traditional journalism, do you try to take out kind of your personal opinion and your personal slant on it and just kind of...
I mean, so journalism has changed so much over, definitely the last 20 years, but I'd say, even longer than that, the last 30, where, the idea of complete objectivity is, it's impossible, right? So if somebody's writing a story, like even, so if you want to talk about strict journalism being the front page of the New York Times, right? There's definitely no I in there. There's no, but just the framing of the story, just the choices of what parts of the story to include and what to leave out, and the way that, any narrative is structured, like that implies like it implies that the writer is judging. So I actually don't write very much strict journalism anymore. After I got my MFA, my big thing, I was very into essay, which is, sort of both. It's like researched, but also, framed. With my own perspective.
In what topics do you typically catch your attention, or is it mostly kind of true crime, or is it like...
Oh no, I definitely, so I was never a true crime person before this case. This is like, I never watched Law and Order, SVU. I didn't read true crime. Like it was, like I said, it frightened me literally to think about that. So no, what did I write before? Well, frankly, I've been on this case for, at this point it's 7 years. So it feels like before was so long ago. But at that time I was editing a literary magazine. So I was doing, a lot of editorial work. And then as far as my own writing goes, I was, I had just had my son. So I was writing a lot about motherhood and parenting and those types of things. I've written about my own travels. I've written, a number of, but long before. So when I had my son, I was writing real estate at the New York Post. I was editing this literary magazine, Guernica. I was the nonfiction editor. And I was teaching nonfiction at NYU. And so I guess you could say like the stuff that I was doing for the Post, like was all real estate and
Yeah.
yeah.
It's interesting. Like you've mentioned several times about the birth of your son. It sounds like that was a real like turning point, which I totally get. Like my life changed so much when I had my kids, and uh, I feel like when you are younger, you kind of be like, oh no, I'd understand what that's like. And then it happens and you're like, this is, just such a, like I was telling a friend of mine recently had a baby and I was telling her a story about how my son was home from the hospital, maybe, I don't know, like maybe 4 days, and I'm rocking him to sleep. And all of a sudden I was just like, oh shit, he lives here. This is his
Yeah.
house. No one's coming to pick him up. And like that was like that moment where like the light bulb went off, and it's such a life-changing thing.
For sure. It was a huge transition for me, both like challenging and clarifying. Like it was challenging in that I suddenly realized like how precious my time was, and how sort of I mean, yeah, just that there, I didn't have the time to do the same things that I did before in the way that I did them. But then it was clarifying in that I was like, wait a minute, I'm not going to do like it suddenly all of the things that I did became a matter of choice.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very easy for me to be like, my New York Post job that like barely paid my rent, like I don't need to do that anymore. That wasn't my passion, right? I was only doing that to make enough money but then when you factor in childcare, it was like no money at all. So it was very easy for me to be like, all right, I'm not doing this anymore. The Guernica job, I love editing and I love that work, but that was pro bono. So at that point, I'm like, I'm not doing this anymore. So it just like, it served to make me decide, okay, what's important to me artistically, what's important to me, as far as money goes, where do I see? And in that way, I'm grateful. I love my kids and, that was a great thing to do. But as far as, from the lens of a professional life, it really served to focus and drive me. Like, I don't know that I would be here actually, I know I wouldn't be here right now. I wouldn't have written this book had it not been for my son.
Yeah.
Like it was really the thing that allowed me to see the story and to believe and to care enough to do it, to kind of, it's like you get to a point in your life where it's like, all right, you got to do this or not, like I could do all this freelance work and put out these essays and sort of be all over the place for as long as I want to, or I can focus and try to sell and write this book, which was,
it's just funny how like it kind of strips away a lot of the nonsense that you're focused on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
How old is your son? Did you say you have more than one kid or?
Yeah, I do. So my son is just turned 8 and my daughter just turned 5. And
so they're still little.
Yeah, they're little. I have little kids.
It's interesting and kind of as you're talking about, the systemic issues with women, and it's really kind of gotten more in kind of on my radar because my daughter is now 17. She's LGBTQ plus, so it's really fascinating to kind of see how like her struggles like becoming an adult and how people will kind of pigeonhole her or because she is LGBTQ plus, how they have thoughts and opinions and be like, oh, that's because you're young and you haven't haven't really experienced things. And so it's really tough. Like, I took her to Pride 2 weekends ago. Yeah. 2 weekends ago. And just sitting, after lunch, it was just, she was so thankful that I was just like accepting her for who. And I'm like, I just want you to be happy. Like I don't care. And, so it's interesting to see those kind of struggles because I never had them,
Right.
Cis white guy, my life's been pretty easy. Do you think it's easier now for women, or I mean, it's got
I
to be
think,
easier, right? I hope it's easier.
in some ways it for sure is. Like, I love to hear that your daughter is able to, identify that in herself and then decide to go. I think that, even 15 years ago, even 20 years ago, like, I don't think that it was as easy there to feel. I think there was probably a lot more fear
Yeah.
about being honest about who one was. So I think in those ways, it's for sure better. However, there are so many things that sort of remain, like, the, take like women's access to reproductive, their
Hmm.
reproductive rights. Like, not only is Roe back on sort of the docket right here
Yeah.
within the next year, they're gonna, I'm terrified they're gonna overturn it. Like, from what I hear, like, it's going to happen. But not only that, like, there are women across this country that it doesn't matter that it's legal, they still can't get
Right. I mean,
abortion.
there's so many, because it's one of those, they'll make it illegal through other channels. They'll or just make it
Exactly.
impossible.
They've made it almost impossible. So unless you're privileged and, have support all around you, it's next to impossible to get an abortion. Like, you've talked, women in Texas and in, some of these states where there's only one provider or none at all,
Hmm.
and then factor in the, that they might have a very low wage job that won't let them leave for the amount of time, and then waiting period. So they've got to go twice, so it's really extremely difficult. And I feel like you can kind of extrapolate that to all different, yeah, great, me too, this is awesome, that women are saying, like, we're not going to accept the, the indignities and the, assaults that we, suffer at the hands of the men we work with, or, men in society in general. And that's amazing. However, like, still, if you read the paper every single day, there's women coming out, which means that it
Hmm.
is still happening.
Hmm.
So it's like, it's in the these conversations are important, and I definitely think that they have improved, women's agency and their strength, and sort of the idea that, they don't need to be afraid. However, women still are. Well, there was a story I just read the other day, and I can't remember because there are so many.
Yeah.
I can't remember the situation, but the woman came out in the Times and talked about, either, I think it was like a coaching staff or something, that had assaulted and raped her or whatever. And she said that she wasn't going to name the aggressor, because she was afraid of how, of any the ramifications that go along with that. So it's like, we're still at this place. Like, she felt comfortable enough, or she felt enraged enough to write an op-ed in the Times.
Yep.
Excellent. But, like, this man is still, somewhere,
Yeah.
maybe,
Because I mean, we as a society still victim blame,
exactly.
and like, well, why were you there? While, how much of this was your fault? And it's just like, it's not.
Exactly. Yeah. That's it. And I feel like that's what she said. She said in the piece, she said, I can't go through all of the, you know, the torment that this will bring up if I go after this person. Like, I would rather not do that than name
Yeah.
this name. So.
What do you think, society wise, we can do better?
Oh gosh, it's so hard. Definitely, I feel like speaking out is a huge thing. I feel like the more women that talk about, and men, talk about their, their experiences and their frustrations, I think the more comfortable that we feel as a society, to, not only serve justice, hopefully,
Hmm.
but There's a quote that I like to bring up always from Judith Herman, who's a trauma expert, and she says something like, those who bear witness are caught in conflict between the perpetrator and the victim. The witness has to take a side just by virtue of being a witness. And all the perpetrator asks is that the witness remain silent. The victim demands action, right?
Yeah.
So if if something happens and you decide to remain silent, then you're weighing in on the side of the perpetrator, right? But if you bear witness and you speak out, then you're speaking out on behalf
of the victim. Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like that's step number one. But then secondly, I do think that, so much of this is in our systems, and which means that I think we can continue to pass legislation and, like Bill Cosby, oh my God, just this.
Oh yeah.
It's unreal. Right. It's unreal. So it's like, how do these loopholes present themselves? Why do they present themselves? And how can we legislate so that they don't?
Right.
So, I mean, he deserves to be behind bars. And
yeah, I saw that, and I honestly didn't even read the whole article. I just saw the headline, and I'm like, well, I'm going to be hearing about that for weeks on end. And it's just tragic.
It's shocking, right? It's shocking. And that prosecutor was like a buddy of Trump. So
no, that's not very surprising. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting you're talking about people coming forward, and it kind of made me think about, we were talking earlier, and I said, that people tend to excuse or understand the story when it's close to them. We were talking about addicts, where I'm like, oh, I understand how this person became an addict, but that other person's just a drug addict. So I suppose if more people come forward, it's more likely that you're going to know that victim, you're going to have a better understanding of what they've been through. And maybe that would encourage them to, your smaller circle to, be more active or vote for legislation. So
I agree with you 100%. There's some amazing study that was done. And I think it was about people going door to door, and they were talking about, I think gay rights. And this was a study, this was like a while ago at this point. And they learned that when, even someone who was totally closed-minded, when the door opened and there was someone, gay in front of them who was like, this was my story or this was my experience, it was like they were able to find commonality. It's like just being face to face with someone, you see someone else's humanity, and you're able to extend, maybe something that you might not have
for sure
been able to or thought you were able to before that. So yeah, what you say, I think is true.
So I just want to say thank you. Where can our listeners go to find out what find out what happened, because we already said, but where can they find your book? What happened to Paula?
Yeah, I mean, you should be able to find it anywhere. Go to your local bookseller and request it. That's probably the best place. It's called What Happened to Paula on the Death of an American Girl. And you can also go to Barnes & Noble or Amazon. And I'm at Katherine Dykstra, my full name.com. So you can come see me at my website and find a way to buy the book there as well.
Are you planning on doing any book tours this year? Or?
Well, it's so weird right now.
It's very weird.
Yeah, I've the book came out June 15th, and I did 5 events at bookstores sort of across the country, which was kind of neat from my office here.
Yeah.
But I'm continuing, I would like to, I plan to go to Cedar Rapids. I'd like to go, I'm from Kansas, so I'd like to go back to Kansas City and read there, maybe in the fall. I think people are going to start feeling much more comfortable having, booking these in-person events.
Yeah. Yeah, we just had fireworks here downtown Plymouth last night, and it was very busy, but still not as busy as it normally is. And it was a weird vibe. Like, people were happy to be out, but still, you could tell people were still hesitant, and there's still a lot of masks. And
it's sort of, I think nobody knows quite what to do.
Yeah.
So hopefully by the fall.
Excellent. Well, hopefully you come up here. And yeah, thank you so much for talking to us. It was really fascinating.
Sure. Thank you, Andy.
No problem. And to our listeners, we'll catch you guys again next week.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. You can find us on all social medias at Inebri-art or on Instagram at Inebri-art6. You can email us at Inebri-art@yahoo.com. And make sure you listen to the other podcasts on the Inebri-art Podcast Network, including Bar Talk, Old Colony Cast, Retro Redoctopus, America's Hometown Horror Podcast, and our newest one, Theme Park Legends, a podcast about working at theme parks. What else? And we'll catch you again next time.